The Craft and Calling podcast and just the Craft and Calling community in general is something that I've been really excited about for the last couple of years. Honestly, this is something that I've been thinking about for a while. I got involved with my family business. It's a painting and drywall business, wall covering, finishing business that was started in 1922 by my great grandfather. And he actually was in the military and came out of World War I and kind of was trying to figure out like what do I do, and so he started this painting business in 1922. So obviously 100-year-old brand that is incredibly invaluable, and we'll talk about the value and effectively why brand matters here in a few minutes. But what I just want to share with you guys first and foremost is how and why the Craft and Calling came into being in the first place. And it really was started back years ago when I first started getting involved in the family business with my dad. And this is before I started my business. This is before I was officially an entrepreneur. I actually started my first business when I was 12, but I didn't really have a category for entrepreneur at the time. And so I had no idea that that's what I was doing. I was starting a business. I was 12 years old and started this camp for girls. And I did it at my family's house, along with my mom, and just had a whole bunch of little girls come over that I was already babysitting. And I was thinking, how can I effectively capitalize on everyone that I'm talking to and engaging with on a weekly basis. And this camp allowed for me to be kind of killing 10 birds with one stone. So I started hosting this girls camp and I ran it for 7 consecutive summers. And then when I was 26, I officially started my marketing business. But throughout that time, throughout me ending the girls camp and starting my own business, I got digital marketing certified and really pursued kind of boots on the ground engagement with communications and copywriting. And I was doing it actually for the purpose of community. It's all been around community ever since I was a little girl when I was 12, gathering these people together, whether they were young girls at the time. And then my first job out of high school was actually working with my church in community and gathering groups together and gathering conversations surrounding just really loving on these young kids in high school who are going through hard times. And then I transitioned to cultivating this marketing and branding background and skill set that then I brought to the family business in 2017. And throughout that whole time, even just looking back to, childhood beyond starting my first business, which was very community oriented, I'm one of 6 kids. And so community has just been the hallmark and kind of foundation of our family and my life since its genesis. And so with the Craft and Calling community, it really came about as I got involved with my dad and seeing how much of what he was doing was in isolated measure. He really was doing so much of it on his own and not necessarily getting support from other people around him. He wasn't part of entrepreneurial groups, or he wasn't part of groups where people were really encouraging each other as it pertains to business growth. The community that he and my mom were a part of was purely Christian and faith-based. So he really didn't have many people speaking into the business side for about 30 years. And so obviously the business grew to get 100 years in business, incredibly successful. That's unheard of. How many 100-year-old brands are there? So he's been incredibly successful along the way, yet recognizing how much in isolation he was operating the business and functioning just in his day-to-day life. So that was kind of observation number 1. Observation number 2 was, in this isolation, we actually are not able to learn everything that we have to learn to run a successful business. There's the marketing, there's the finances, there's the operations, there's customer service. There's so many facets of what constitutes a strong business that it is impossible to do it entirely well on your own. And so while obviously he's got, his crew and his team and he's growing, there was some fundamental lack because of the lack of community. And I have found this in my own entrepreneurial journey since I started my business when I was 26. Some of the most impactful areas and elements to my life has been and derived from community and engaging with other people, hearing what they're doing. I actually really started my career in general. I was, 18 and started listening to these podcasts by the OGs in the marketing space, hearing what they were doing. And so I was kind of getting community by proxy of digital podcasting. And a lot of people are doing that these days, which is fantastic. This is why we're here. And there's something about community in person, community through conversation that actually we really are missing out on today just by sitting and listening rather than having an ongoing back and forth and engaged conversation. So to that point, and with that, there's something about why we're here today, why we're talking about these things, and how the craft and calling, kind of my vision for it. I really care about legacy. My dad has worked so incredibly hard. He's 65 and will be 66, and I'm saying it quietly because it's his birthday next week, or 2 weeks from now. And he's as young as ever. And he is, and I keep saying the but and the piece because the two there are two truths that coexist. He's getting older and he's as young as ever, and he needs to be thinking about passing down the business and what's his exit plan. And I've been engaging with a lot of business owners over the last 6 years of being in business myself. And in so doing, I recognize how few of them actually do think about what they want for the long-term trajectory of their business. And so one of the first questions I'll ask companies is, what do you want? Where do you want this to go? What do you want the end result to be? And again, so many of them have not thought about that question, but what it does do is that it makes them pause and think actually in real time, what do I want and where do I want this business to go? Because apart from knowing what we want, we're never going to be able to lead from a place with the end goal in mind, predetermined and created by us. We're going to be operating in alignment with everyone around us. What are our customers saying? What are our competitors saying? What are our colleagues saying? The 3 C's. I wrote an article for Digital Marketer last year, and I talked about the 3 C's and how each one of those are deadly in their own regard if they are the ones in the driver's seat of our business. Now, if we're the ones in the driver's seat of our business, each one of those 3, our customers, colleagues, and competitors, actually add really insightful data. They add in the potential necessary, almost community. Like, we can think of our competitors as a part of our community where we're actually having a tune, voice. We're listening to what they're doing. We're hearing what they're doing. And then we ourselves in the driver's seat, knowing what we want, knowing who we are as a brand, then makes an informed decision based on kind of like different inputs. Each one of these 3 C's, competitors, colleagues, and our customers, are an input for us that allow for us to then make an informed decision about our business. So effectively, the community that we have in place, whether it's any one of those 3 C's, much less, having mentors, folks who we have effectively chosen to be a part of our community, and we are asking their input to come in and analyze what we're doing and how we're living, and ensuring that we're living in alignment to the ideal that we have intentionally created. So we have to know what we want in order to then create the ideal for ourselves and for our business. Yesterday, I was asked what makes a construction champion. And, it always comes back to who we are. A construction champion, and really any champion in general, is led from a deep well from within. They know who they are. They know their values. They know what they want. They know their ideal to then guide and drive their lives accordingly. And then that translates into the way they show up in business, the way that they lead their business, and the way that they show up with their family. Who we show up in the business world is usually a mirror for how we will then show up with our families. If we're getting angry at employees, there's a high likelihood that we're probably getting angry with our children. And so ultimately, there's no disparity. There's no disparity between the professional and the personal. And so if we allow ourselves to look in the mirror and assume radical responsibility over who we are, that then positions us to be able to lead from this place of, okay, I know who I am. I know the truth. And I then can lead from this place of authenticity. And a couple days ago, I actually talked on a podcast about specifically the three things that really constitute a strong brand. And I want to talk about brand, y'all, because, we've got this 100-year-old legacy business in our family. We've got this 100-year-old brand. But what is a brand? Why has it made it 100 years, and what will allow for it to make it another 100 years? So when I say strong brand, I'm talking about three different things. I'm talking about identity, I'm talking about story, and I'm talking about empathy. And so breaking each one of those three down is ultimately the kind of conglomerate of what constitutes this word and this concept of brand. And so first, identity, really knowing who you are. And this comes from going inward to identify, what are my core values? What do I want? So a lot of what we've been talking about. But then with story, having a story and a why associated with every single value deepens and strengthens the ability for people to engage with your identity and then feel an emotional resonance. This concept of story is incredibly important, because what happens is that we've got our values that have no roots to them. Asking why and attributing and honestly searching for, why do I really value this narrative, or value this belief, or value this behavior? It's kind of, I attribute this whole concept of value and story with a planted flower in the ground. And then asking why traces the roots all the way down to the genesis, the originating experience, story, that then have so much more depth and weight. Because, you can take the topical value, the flower, right, which everyone can see. Okay, I really value, I value emotional intelligence. I'll make this personal. That's my value. That's my flower. And if I was to ask why and trace the roots deep, deep, deep down, the story of why I value emotional intelligence is because my personal life fell apart as a result of not having emotional intelligence. My marriage dissolved and it just completely crushed me. And that story now adds breadth and depth to this value of emotional intelligence in a way that, apart from it, it doesn't hold much weight. For the listener, especially, I know, but for the listener, they don't really understand the why there. And every story, whether big or small, matters. And I want to talk about this for a moment, because yesterday when I was having this conversation about what constitutes a construction champion, I shared this concept around, what constitutes a champion is someone who knows who they are and really holds value for their story, for their identity, etc. And the gentleman I was speaking with, his eyes got big and he was like, wow, Christine, I think that at the end of the day, they don't value brand, their identity, story, and empathy, because they don't value themselves. They intrinsically do not value who they are, to then feel confident to lead with the story, lead with the why, to develop and strengthen this brand externally, because they have never done the work to value the internal. And that changes everything. That flips everything on its head. One, because we're getting real honest here. We're getting real to the heart of why we're not spending time investing in the brand, investing in ourselves, is because we do not value it. That alone, there's a story there for each one of us if we struggle with valuing our brands and valuing ourselves. So then this is cause for doing I think of it of like Sherlock. So we take our spyglass and we're like, okay, let's trace the root here. Let's pull forth the story of that originating thought. Okay, why do I not value myself? Why do I not hold space and worth for my brand and who I am, to thus know it and then be able to present it externally? And so if we do the work to trace the roots there, we come to find out that lack of value could very well be predicated in a little narrative or a little experience in childhood, perhaps, that really shaped fundamentally our view of ourselves. So every single belief and behavior, every day, every time, is tied to some story. And no story is unimportant because it shapes who we are today. So with that, with understanding how important story is, and y'all, people remember story 22 times more than they remember facts. So with identity, with story, now we get to empathy. And this empathy is effectively our story, our identity turned outward and engaging outward. It's the manner in which we engage with our customers. It's the manner in which we engage with our families. Again, our proprietary or our personal lives and our professional lives, we cannot show up disparate because that is impossible. Who we are at the end of the day will always come out in either regard, regardless of who we're around. We're going to be seen. We can't hide. And so it may be easier to hide at work than it is to hide at home, or maybe it's easier to hide at home than it is to hide at work. However, at the end of the day, we will always be found out. The truth will always come to light, regardless of how much darkness we've shed over it. So moving away from that concept towards empathy, and why empathy is so important is because empathy is ultimately the external manifestation of the work that we've done internally. And it's the external, kind of honestly, I think of it almost as like the ability to draw people towards you. So the work that we do to know ourselves and know our brand, our identity, and our story is really what allows us to lead with authenticity. And then the empathy that we hold for our customers is what really attracts and draws them to us. And so authenticity without empathy can end up becoming narcissistic. But then empathy without authenticity can end up being manipulative. And so that's why both pieces of brand is so incredibly valuable and important. Authenticity and empathy when it is what constitutes a strong brand. And it allows for us to, kind of that authenticity piece is what sets the expectation for the experience someone's going to have with us. And then the empathy is ultimately what allows for us to fulfill on that expectation that we're setting on the emotional experience that they're going to have. 95% of our purchase decisions are made in our subconscious, which is where our emotions live. We have to be tapping into the emotions of our customers. And so often stories are the conduit to allow for the emotional resonance, for them to feel seen and heard by us, but then them to also resonate with us in return. This is where authenticity staves manipulation from empathy. Because if all we're doing is saying, we know how you feel, we care about your problems, and it's all about them, and we're never showing up in the story, that's what can turn into manipulation. And also, they may feel good, but they're not bought into you. So that's where authenticity actually allows for a mutual handshake, being known and knowing. We need to know our customer, but we need to allow them to know us. And so that's where the power of story really allows for us to lead from this place of allowing us to be known, but we have to know who we are to thus be known. So to this whole topic of legacy is so tied to it. You can't have legacy without story. And so when it comes to us looking at what do I want in business? What do I want for my life? We have to know our stories in order to thus know and create a legacy in accordance with it. I shared this the other day, and I've shared this a couple times on different stages and podcasts. I wrote my eulogy when I turned 30. And what this did was it forced me to look in the mirror of my ideal and thus outline it, create it, and then work retroactively backward and say, am I living my life in accordance to fulfilling on this ideal, this legacy of who I want to be? Am I actually writing the narrative of my legacy every single day with intention? Or am I living as default to the 3 C's: competitors, colleagues, and customers? Am I just living in reaction, or am I living proactive in accordance with my ideal? In order for us to create a legacy, we have to know what we want. We have to know who we are. And then we have to take action and move into the driver's seat of our lives and displace everyone and everything else so that we are the ones writing our story in accordance with our ideal that thus creates a narrative of legacy. So This is why legacy matters. This is why community matters, because we cannot do this on our own. There is no way I'm going to be able to live in the fullness of my ideal, in the fullness of who I want to be at the end of my life alone. We were made for connection. We were made for community. And so this is why the Craft and Calling exists. I'm so excited for the time, and I'm not sure when the date is going to be exactly, but I'm so excited for when it's time for us to launch the digital community. And in the meantime, I welcome you to send me a note if you'd like to be included in this. We need to have conversations that are hard. We need to have conversations where we're looking in the mirror of ourselves and our business. And we need to welcome other people into the conference room, into the arena. Theodore Roosevelt likens, the man in the arena to, the one who's doing the work, whereas everyone on the outside of the arena, they're just the critics. And it's so much easier to point and scoff at somebody else rather than be in the arena and shut out the noise of everyone else who's not doing the work. So this Craft and Calling community is for the ones who are willing to enter the arena and do the work together. So with that, I'm excited for when that day comes. Let me know if you're interested in joining, and I'll keep you posted. Thank you, my friends. If this conversation resonated with you, if you recognized a bit of your own story in it, know you're not alone. This work is so demanding, and we were never meant to do any of it in isolation. Now, before we wrap up, I am so grateful that this podcast and the Craft and Calling community are supported by Foundation First, a company dedicated to helping businesses like yours grow through a strong digital presence that attracts the right customers so that you can spend less time chasing work and more time leading well. As part of that support, we are offering free marketing consultations to help you take a step back, gain clarity, and together we will explore what's possible for your business and for the legacy you're building. Visit foundationfirstmarketing.com to learn more. Friends, thank you. Thank you for spending your time with me today here on the Craft and Calling podcast. And remember, you are building your legacy right now, one moment at a time. I'll see you next week.